Right, okay, let's start today's meeting. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. And yes, hopefully, happy beginning of the new 2022. That's the first meeting of our discussion club this year, and I'm absolutely excited. I hope that you're all too. It's amazing to see so many, friends, colleagues coming to this meeting, and I'm sure that we are going to have a fascinating discussion today. But before that, a couple of housekeeping rules. Okay, so first of all, let me just mention that this meeting is held under the Chatham House rules. Anyone who comes to the meeting is free to use the information from the discussion, but is not allowed to reveal who made this or that particular comment. Okay, so I hope that this will increase the openness of our discussion. That's A. Second, would you please be kind to keep your mics muted off if you're not asking the question or not delivering anything? That will be good. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you are very welcome to post them in the chat box at the bottom of your screens, or with annotations, just raise your hand and I will give you a chance, to ask your question. So these are housekeeping rules. Anything else on the way then? Right. So today's topic is the 46th president of the United States of America, Joe Biden. And Biden, a year in, how has he done? What challenges does he face? That's today's discussion topic. And I'm very happy to welcome our presenter, Alan Davis, who's going to start today's meeting to tell us about that. But before that, I would like to attract your attention to the fact, guys, if you suddenly do not want your full name to appear, so you're very welcome to change. You can rename your image and put whatever you want other people to know about you, whether that's a short name or, any form of that. If you do not want your face kind of to be recorded whatsoever, please switch off your cameras. That would be fine with us as well, right? So everything is up to you, the mode of participation. I would like to welcome a couple of people in particular, just to say thanks to them. That's Kathy Raffaelli. She is the CEO of UBIS University, Switzerland, and Kathy, thank you for coming. If you have, Kathy is joining from the United States of America, by the way, so she has personal experience of Biden's presence in office the first year. We have Sean Jaso, who's actually the director of DBA program at UBIS. And Sean, as far as I know, you've got your PhD about politics in the US, so I expect some valuable contribution from you too.
No pressure then, Tony, thank you.
Well, you see, you've got plenty of people willing to contribute, I hope. But actually, just a couple of just to get the feeling, the understanding of the geography where people are joining from. So could I ask some people, and you mention if you don't mind? Okay, so Edward, where is Edward now? Edward, just country where you're joining from, Edward.
Hello, everyone. I'm joining you from Japan. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here.
Lovely. Edward. Thank you so much. Martin, would you tell us where you're joining from?
Yeah, I'm on the edge of London, yeah.
Brilliant. London, UK. Thank you, Martin. Marita, where are you joining from?
Hi, everyone. I'm joining from Lebanon.
Lovely, Lebanon. Thank you, Marita. Who else? James?
I mean, for me, it's just Central London. Yeah, same as always.
Okay, right. Okay, that's brilliant. Anybody else? Carmela?
I'm in the Philippines.
Philippines, brilliant. Thank you much. I have the second screen of people. Hiba, is Hiba with us? No, Hiba is not with us yet. That's fine. Pilot, where are you joining from?
Hello, everyone. I am joining from Harare, Zimbabwe.
Lovely, Zimbabwe. Thank you. Thank you. Mark, you're getting from?
Hi, everyone. It's morning for me. I'm close to Newport Beach on the west coast of the United States.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Well, and maybe Milan, the last, not the least. Milan, where are you joining from?
Well, it's actually Vincent. Milan's my son, but that's okay. I'm joining from St. Croix in the United States, Virgin Islands in the Caribbean.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. That's the geography is absolutely fascinating.
You've
Okay,
forgotten Chris. You've forgotten Chris who's joining from Hull, which is really impressive.
Oh, yes. Chris, I can't see the face of Chris. Chris.
Afternoon, afternoon, Prof. I'm joining.
David, go ahead.
Yeah,
Mugali,
I'm joining from South Africa.
South Africa, brilliant. Gosh, that's amazing. Hussein, maybe you know, where are you joining from, Hussein?
I'm joining from Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, west coast of Saudi.
Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, brilliant. So time-wise, I believe, Alan, you have like 20 minutes to present your point.
Okay.
And yes, and then we have a couple, maybe more contributions. Then the floor, guys, mic's off, right? You help me, please. And then we have the floor open for our questions, and you know, the actual discussion starts then. So, Alan, please.
Okay, well, firstly, welcome everyone, both people returning and people who are new. It's great to see you. Secondly, I'm sorry I haven't done a PowerPoint or any kind of presentation. It's just chalk and talk, I'm afraid. And I'll try not to talk for too long, because I know, for example, Martin, who has a lot to contribute, needs to leave after about 40. So my rough idea was just a few introductory comments and then try and look at Biden's first year. Of course, January 20th was the anniversary, so that's 3 days ago. In terms of achievements, on the domestic policy front and on the foreign policy front, that won't take very long. And then failures or relative failures on the domestic and foreign policy fronts, and then just try and look ahead to the year ahead. Sorry, to look at what's coming down the tracks in the year ahead. Okay, so just a couple of introductory remarks. I'm not going to talk much about Biden's age and whether he's too old for the job. I just want to remind you that when Biden won in November 2020, his personal mandate was extraordinary. He won the biggest popular vote ever. I know Trump won the second biggest, but Biden won this enormous, I forget the exact figure, in excess of 80 million. But, and I think it's crucial to understanding all that follows, his party, the Democrats, had a disappointing performance in Congress. They were expecting to at least hold their majority in the House that they won in 2018, but they didn't. They lost seats. Okay, they have a majority, but it's the smallest majority, I think, in living memory. So the numbers are something like 222 Democrats, 213 Republicans. I think that's right. So that gives them a wafer-thin majority. And in the Senate, if you recall, it could easily have been 52 for the Republicans, 48 for the Democrats. But because the two Georgia seats, subject to state law, required runoff elections on January the 6th, the famous January 6th, the other thing that was happening that day, of course, in addition to the insurrection, was there's two runoffs in Georgia. And the Democrats won both, giving us a split Senate of 50-50. And because Kamala Harris has a casting vote in the Senate, that gives Biden a notional, and as we'll see in a second, a very notional majority. So Biden started with a much less advantageous position in Congress than Obama. If you look at Obama at the beginning of his administration, the Democrats had a very big majority in the House and a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. 60 senators were willing to support Democrats, which meant the Republicans couldn't filibuster. And that's a very rare event. Trump in 2017 started with majorities in Congress bigger than Biden has now. Clinton in 92 had majorities bigger than Biden has now. Bush in 2000 was in a similar position to Biden now, in that the Republicans ran the House, but with a bigger majority than Biden, and the Senate was 50-50 for a few months. So in everything that follows, I think you have to contextualize Biden's position by remembering that in terms of the Congress, he's been in a relatively weak position. Okay, so what's he done with it? Well, in terms of domestic policy, two things or a few things stand out. One is the massive fiscal stimulus that happened in the early part of this year. Mark might want to dispute the numbers because the numbers is always, controversial. Is it new money? Is it all going to be spent at once? But the thing that's banded around is that 1.9 trillion was put into the economy back in the spring to essentially engage in pandemic relief funds. Put that in perspective, that's about twice the Obama stimulus from early 2009. Okay, you've got to take out inflation, I know, but even so, that's still, a massive stimulus. The second big injection came, you might recall, in the fall when Biden got the infrastructure bill through. Again, we can quibble about the numbers and talk about, time span and so on, but it's about 1.2 trillion. Giving you 3.1 trillion injection. Two pretty substantial achievements, I think. The second one particularly, because the second one was done, if you remember, on a bipartisan basis. In other words, it got some support from the Republicans, and bipartisanship is obviously increasingly rare. What else has he done? He's got a record number of judges appointed. He's got something like 80-odd federal court judges appointed. Not at the Supreme Court, there's been no vacancy yet, but in the lower courts, which is the biggest number since Reagan 40 years ago. And don't dismiss those judges, because although not as eye-line catching as the Supreme Court, most cases don't go to the Supreme Court. The federal judges lower down the structure, in some senses, have more day-to-day impact. What else has he done? Rejoined the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord on climate, and got unemployment down. I haven't got the numbers. Mark, again, might correct me on this, but unemployment's down, and I think employment is up. Okay, what about the failings? Well, in terms of domestic failings, there's quite a lot. He failed to get the Build Back Better stuff through. It's still possible it will go through, but it will go through, if at all, in a heavily reduced way. The original proposal was 3.5 trillion. And then because of opposition from a couple of Democrat senators, that was scaled down to about half that. But even that's not yet gone through. Voting reform hasn't gone through. Could yet go through, but hasn't at the moment gone through. In terms of COVID, and remember that Biden and the Democrats are extremely critical of Trump on COVID. Yes, it's absolutely true that the vaccine program and the testing program were accelerated. What was the figure? Something like 100 million jabs in a very short space of time. But in July of 2021, Biden boasted that July 4th would be Independence Day from COVID, and that someone's compared that to Bush famously arguing in May 2003, mission accomplished in Iraq, and then more people died after Bush had said that. And that Biden boast now looks pretty threadbare. I think the total number of deaths in the US now from COVID is around about 850,000. In terms of other sort of domestic problems, Biden has talked, Democrats have talked more than Biden, although he joined the party late, about doing something with a filibuster. If you're not familiar with a filibuster, it's this bizarre, arcane procedure in the Senate whereby if 40 senators or 41 want to block progress of a bill, they can just filibuster it, they can essentially block it. So you need 60 senators on board to stop that. Biden doesn't have that. So there's been talk about changing the rules of the filibuster on the grounds that until that does happen, until you change the rules of the filibuster, Biden's subject to capture by Republican senators. The problem is that at least two Democrat senators, Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kristen Sinema from Arizona, have made it clear they will absolutely not vote in favor of changing rules of the filibuster, which has kind of stymied him so far. So the Build Back Better stuff hasn't gone through, voting reform hasn't yet gone through, immigration reform hasn't gone through. I think, in fact, the number of immigrants is substantially up. Now, partly that might be COVID related. In other words, a lot more people are going to go there in 2021 than 2020, but nonetheless, clearly, it's a problem for Biden, something that Trump and the Republicans attack endlessly. What else has gone wrong? Inflation. And when in the spring, the first of those huge stimulus bills was going through, the 1.9 trillion one. Larry Summers, who has been a stalwart of Democrat administrations going back forever, was warning that the US was already approaching an inflationary situation. Do not do this. And Biden administration kind of poo-pooed that and said, no, there's plenty of slack in the economy. You know, we don't believe the unemployment figures. We think that actually there's more unemployment out there than a register. I'm going to go ahead anyway. And you've now got the highest inflation for, I don't know, 30, 40 years or something like that. Biden initially was blaming supply problems or, you know, price war and so on, but it's looking like that's actually a more serious issue. So I guess, you know, how do you measure an elected politician? In the end, it's about what do people think? When Biden came in, he didn't really have a honeymoon, not really. The approval rating when he came in was about 56%. I think Obama's was about 70. I can't remember about other presidents. That's now gone down to about 42, something like that. So as they keep saying on 538, you know, it's significantly below the water here. And if you want to translate that into real votes rather than just opinion polls, there was a terrible moment for the Democrats in November when there were elections in Virginia for the governor and other state officials. And Virginia is a state that Biden carried a year earlier. But in November, the Republican Youngkin won in Virginia. And so that was, if you want, a sort of wake-up call for the Democrats. In fact, the infrastructure bill passed shortly after that on the grounds that, you know, Democrats thought we better get our act together. So it's a pretty mixed bag on the domestic front. I mean, all I would say before we look at foreign policy front is that, look, we're a year in. It's very premature to kind of write Biden off. I mean, as I said on the group, you know, like Reagan a year in was extremely unpopular. And in the midterm elections of 1982, the Republicans got slaughtered. And yet Reagan bounced back and won the biggest landslide since at least 72, maybe 64, maybe the 30s, just 2 years later. Clinton, remember, had a shocker in the midterms 2 years in. Republicans took control of Congress for the first time since 1954, 40 years. That was a political earthquake. Clinton came back and won again. And so on and so on and so on. But Martin's point on the group was, yeah, but that was then, this is now. You know, we're in a very different political environment now. We're in a political environment in which voters appear to be more volatile, social media and so on and so on and so on. Perhaps that'll come out in discussion. In terms of foreign policy, I was scratching around for some achievements in terms of foreign policy. I mean, if anyone can help me out later, I'd be extremely grateful. All I could think of really in terms of improved foreign policy stuff was that, you know, the tone, the language has changed, and we look like we've got a kind of like warmer relationship with NATO allies and others, you know, after the kind of, you know, kind of Trump years. But other than that, I couldn't really come up with anything substantial. Perhaps somebody can help me out. In terms of foreign policy failures, of course, it's much easier. I mean, August and the rather chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and of course that was Trump's policy to withdraw from Afghanistan, but, you know, Biden was in charge. Biden has to take the rap if it goes wrong. And if you look at the approval ratings, you know, if I'd been more organized, I'd have put it online, but you actually literally see the approval ratings collapse from August. In terms of current foreign policy problems, again, you know, the Iran deal is essentially expired, and what's going to happen about that. Taiwan, Biden famously misspoke a while back about Taiwan and stated that, you know, the United States would regard the defense of Taiwan as a foreign policy objective, which no previous administration has ever done. I think there had to be correction after that. The Ukraine, literally as we speak, we are seemingly the biggest foreign policy crisis in Europe since 1945. We can perhaps talk about that a bit later. And, you know, again, the other day, Biden misspoke, or did he, right? Is that actually, did he reveal American policy? So when you're looking at the first year, I think, and I'm a big Biden fan, I think it would be a reasonable interim assessment to say the record's mixed at best. I think you have to contextualize. You've got to take that position in Congress into account, right? Manchin and Sinema are endlessly thwarting what the Democrats want. I think it's worth saying at this point as well that the Democratic Party, it's not just about numbers. It's not just that the Democrats don't have sizable majorities in Congress. The party is also ideologically divided. I was thinking about this the other day. If you take those same numbers, in other words, a tiny majority in the House and essentially deadlock in the Senate, but the Democratic Party was united, that would be one thing. But the reality, of course, is the Democratic Party is deeply divided. So what you have, for example, in the Senate is you have Manchin and Sinema on the right, blocking stuff, and you have people like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren on the left, and then you've got similar kind of schisms in the House, with AOC and the squad, criticizing Biden from the left, but equally people on the right. So it's not just numbers; it's also the divisions within the Democratic Party. Okay, I don't want to say much more. I just want to look ahead. So we're a year in. What challenges lie ahead for the Biden administration? Okay, so on the domestic side, they might still try and get Build Back Better through. They might still try and get some kind of voting rights bill through. But in the absence of any movement on the filibuster, it's hard to see they can do much on either of those things. Come March is the first congressional primaries in Texas. So these are the primaries for the forthcoming November midterm elections. And this is the first real test of how much Trump really controls the Republican Party. So if in these primaries from March onwards, Trump-endorsed Republican candidates are able to defeat established Republican politicians, then this is Trump's party, right? I mean, the one that everyone talks about is Wisconsin, where Liz Cheney was one of the first to come out against Trump over the allegations of stolen elections and so on. And she was removed from a ranking position in the House, and Trump's endorsed an opponent and so on. So if starting in March in Texas, you're looking at Trump essentially controlling the Republican Party, and Trump supporters win and non-Trump supporters don't. Obviously, that tells us quite a lot about whether Trump himself will run in November 2024. In June, the Supreme Court is expected to rule on abortion. Now, we're looking at the most conservative court. I thought about this a lot. You normally got to qualify these statements, haven't you? But I don't see the need to qualify this. This is the most conservative court since the 1930s. It's the most conservative court since the Hughes Court. I mean, it's not just that 6 of them were appointed by Republicans. It's not just that. It's that until the appointment of Barrett, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, was able to act essentially as a swing vote. That's over. And if you look at the discussions around the Mississippi abortion law a few months back, you had at least 3 Republican-appointed judges, possibly more, openly discussing the overturning of Roe v. Wade, with Roberts kind of long regarding that. He himself described Roe v. Wade as settled law, and so on, and so on, and so on. So come June, you could be looking at the overturn of Roe v. Wade, or maybe not. Maybe they'll just rule that the Texas law on abortion, that's the one where it's about heartbeat in 6 weeks, isn't okay. Maybe the Mississippi law on 15 weeks is, but I mean, that, that's, as you might imagine, I mean, that's going to be absolutely explosive. Meanwhile, we have Ukraine. Biden was vice president, remember, in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and sent troops into eastern Ukraine. The Biden administration is taking a tougher stance, or at least seemingly taking a tougher stance, talking about sanctions such as we've never seen before. Well, let's see. Let's wait and see on that. Taiwan, we await developments, and Iran, we await developments. So if I can finish by looking to the November midterms and then hand over to anyone. Look, midterm elections. If you look at the House, it's a staggering statistic. The president's party have only ever gained seats in midterm elections in the House on 3 occasions. 3, entire history of the United States. And each is explicable. That's 1934, when Roosevelt and the New Deal were pretty popular and the Democrats gained seats in the House. 1998, when Clinton was under pressure over impeachment, there was kind of sympathy for Clinton, and Democrats gain a few seats in the House. Not enough to take it back, but gain a few seats. And the third and final example is 2002, when George W. Bush, his party, the Republicans, gained seats in the House because you'd had 9/11, you'd had the war against Afghanistan, you hadn't yet had the war against Iraq. Those are the three exceptions. The post-war average is for the president's party to lose 26 seats in the House. If it's even that Democrat majority is gone. It's no more, right? Could be worse than that. If you look at Obama in 2010, in the midterms in 2010, 2 years in, the Democrats lost 62 seats in the House, right? And that was what Obama famously described as a shellacking, right? The reason this matters so much is the moment the Republicans get a majority in the House, if they do, they get the speakership, they control all the committee chairs, they determine the agenda of those committees, the funding of those committees, and so on. And it was when the Democrats were in the equivalent position after the 2018 elections that they went after Trump with the impeachment process, right? And some Republicans talking, probably hot air, but who knows, about going after Biden. But even if they don't do that, they'll have control of the House, which specializes in budgetary matters. The Senate record is not quite as bad for the president's party, but it's not much removed from that. There are 34 Senate seats up for grabs in November, 20 held by Republicans. And you normally say, well, look, the cycle is these were seats that were last contested in 2016, which was a really good year for the Republicans. Maybe the Democrats will do a little bit better, but not in the current climate. So you wouldn't bet against a Republican Congress after November, or at least a Republican House, maybe a Republican Congress, which means, therefore, that Biden's moment is now. Biden had 2021, because none of this is a mystery or a surprise, right? Everyone knows this is coming. So Biden had 2021 and what remains of 2022 to get stuff done, okay? So if you take the Supreme Court, for example, there's been no vacancy. There's quite a lot of pressure behind the scenes I can't remember his name now, but he was appointed by Bill Clinton all those years ago, about 30 years ago or something. What the hell's his name? Stephen Breyer. Pressure on him to quit now, whilst Biden can replace him with a liberal-leaning judge, and because they learned from Ruth Ginsburg, right? Ruth Ginsburg didn't do that, and therefore could be replaced by Trump just before the 2020 election. So, forget the age, forget Kamala Harris, who's gone missing. It's too early, it's premature. It's like looking at the Mona Lisa from an inch away, you need perspective on it. But a year in, it's a mixed bag, it always is. But it's looking pretty difficult. It's looking pretty difficult at the moment for Biden. Okay, Tony, over to anyone.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Alan, thank you very much. I would say a lot of quantitative characteristics of his first year. What about qualitative ones? And kind of, if I may lead the discussion in the direction, is America a better place after a year on of his presidency, if I may? So any ideas, suggestions about that? And of course, comments or questions to Alan as well. Please, anybody? I see a question in Sean's eyes.
In my eyes?
Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Raphael's favorite saying, good morning from Los Angeles. I want to comment just very quickly. This is exciting. Less than 9 hours ago, a few of us in this room were in a graduation ceremony, live Zooming in Vietnam, watching many UBIS graduates. It was very exciting, pretty cool. And now we're back. So thank you very much, Alan, for your excellent, fascinating commentary. I think you have maybe 3 or 4 Americans or people in the United States right now, and it's always interesting to hear. It's always interesting to be in the country of which someone else is talking about your country, particularly politics. I did write down a couple of things just as a maybe reflection on what you've said. And I want to I think Tony talked about the fact that this is an area of my interest as well. scholarship as well. The United States is, in terms of politics, is a very competitive game. A lot of times people forget American politics, you know, it's a show. It's extremely political. So you have a two-party system that is just going at it, which might be kind of frustrating, but it's also terrific. Everyone is trying to make public policy better for all of their constituents. In terms of the fiscal policy stuff, everyone knew and everyone knows that all of that fiscal policy is ripe with the party and jammed into the public policy sphere, yielding inflation. That's a given, including monetary policy as well. Some of you may or may not know the filibuster. The filibuster's purpose is to give minority power, actual power. So there's a lot of history of it. And most everyone who hates the filibuster when they're not in power, and when they are in power, the filibuster is good. So it's an interesting history there. And the last couple points, I would say that Biden's overall problem, in my view, is his messaging. He's all over the place. His age is not irrelevant, but that's irrelevant. His pandemic messaging has been ineffective, ineffectual, causing all kinds of other problems. In fact, I don't think any world leader has gotten it right. That's something I talk about in other lectures on my own. And you mentioned Roe versus Wade. Finally, my last comment, Roe versus Wade, a discussion point for the last 50 years. To clarify and simplify, in my view, if you wanted to fix or legislate abortion correctly, properly, the only way to do it is through an act of Congress. And there's never been an act of Congress since forever. So states have rights to do what they want. And yet when the appellate process goes to the Supreme Court in 1973, you have the rule of law, Roe versus Wade. But it's when you hear people say it's ineffective or it's the worst law ever or the worst judgment ever made, that kind of stuff. The real reason, in my view, is because the Supreme Court will say, throw it back to Congress. And if you can't create a law of the land, then it's not effective policy. The country may not be ready for it, or it's just whenever I hear the Roe versus Wade challenge. So there's just a couple of insights to a very, very interesting talk. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Brilliant, Sean. Thank you very much. Kathy, please.
So first of all, thank you very much, Alan, for joining us. And it was interesting to hear you're a Biden fan, because I think we can do counterpoint here.
Yeah.
I am not steeped as you are academically, or as Sean is academically, in this particular subject matter, but I am a citizen and I've been pretty observant. The reason Biden's in is backlash from Trump. So nobody voted for Biden. They voted against Trump. And that's a very different mandate when you're a president. I think centrists like myself were embarrassed at Trump's antics and starting to get extremely frustrated with his behaviors. So there was also an element of maybe supporting his policies, but not supporting his behaviors. And as a citizen, I think a lot of people in the US had trouble with that, because we intertwine that into the word character. And unfortunately, we're all having to parse this word now in a way that psychologically we've never had to do. I think, to Sean's point, age should be irrelevant, but mental acuity isn't.
Right.
Biden is failing mentally. It's hard to watch him and not come to that conclusion, even if you're his most rabid supporter. And Kamala Harris is an empty suit, which most people, even the Democrats in the US, feel that way. So the entire executive branch right now isn't viewed as formidable. The other comment I would make is that it's been my observation in talking to people on both. By the way, being a businesswoman, I tend to try to be very nonpartisan, because I need to, I need to operate in both Congresses, in both eras. But when I talk to both of my colleagues, whether they're on the Democratic side or the Republican side, most would highlight that we are in the midst in the US of a civil war. Now, it's a very elegant war. It's a war of words, not a war of weapons. But make no mistake, the divide is deep and the passions are high. And I think that you referred to a couple of particular issues that I'd love to just quickly provide some American perspective on. The first was the Virginia issue. For those of you that are not following it because of where you live, it was somewhat less relevant on the world stage, but it was extremely indicative of what's going on in America. First of all, I happen to have met the former governor, and he's one step above a cretin, and he comes off that way. He is, when you're in a meeting with him, you can actually become uncomfortable. And I've been in a small meeting with him. So he has an arrogance that might be deserved. He was the, I forget his exact title, but the consigliere of Bill Clinton when Bill was going through his impeachment proceedings. And he was very arrogant about his position, about the way the populace felt, this whole issue of whether parents had a right in the say of the education of their children. That's sacrosanct in America. I mean, that's like pouring gasoline on a fire to tell a parent in America that they do not have a vote or say in the indoctrination of their children. And he naively, and he's not a naive operator at all. In fact, I think he's one of the most savvy operators I've met. So I was really puzzled that he sort of tripped into this issue when he could have sidestepped it and avoided it, like the political operative he is. So that election stirred the hearts and minds of parents. And that is not something you flirt with in the US. You also mentioned very briefly the radical left and the radical right. And you are right. There are times where if I voted Republican, I hung my head in shame. And there are times where if I voted Democrat, because I am a swing voter, I'm the one they want, I hung my head in shame. But the rhetoric coming out of AOC and the hypocrisies of the left that that are painted right now because that's the party in power, the hypocrisies are really amazing. So AOC in her district, masks and lockdowns and kids can't go to school because of Omicron and, defund the police and this and that. And then she goes off to Florida and parties in clubs with no masks. If you're a politician, you can't be a hypocrite. In this day of instant Twitter and instant social media, everything you do comes under instant evaluation. So there is a big issue in the Democratic Party because they are the party in power now. So the lightning rod is on them. And even the media, who has been extremely charitable to the Democratic Party in the past, the Republicans always call it the arm of the Democratic Party. They are starting to be extremely critical of the hypocrisy they're seeing. And then I guess the last point I'd like to make is that I do think the pandemic gives everybody a chance, unfortunately, to sit at home and stew over it. People are sitting in front of the TV has become a national pastime. Not that it wasn't before, but with with some states still having horrible lockdowns. So it has increased a glare of all of the rhetoric and all of the issues, whereas most people would have been out playing golf or out at parties or out, boating or skiing or whatever. Now they're more likely to be sitting in their homes, and therefore this becomes, much more inflamed. So those are just some comments I have on you know, a personal insider's view on what's going on in America.
Kathy, thank you very much. Absolutely incredible. And just kind of some evidence, I think it's okay to mention that Biden turns 80 this year, being born in 1942. And yes, being a hypocrite and being a politician, I think that was particularly, you know, particular concern of all British people at the moment as well. So, but that's fascinating, Kathy. Thank you. So we have 3 questions from Edward, but I saw Martin's hand as well. Martin, would you like to add to the discussion, have a question?
Well, yes, very quickly though, because I've got to go, but I agree with everything that Kathleen said, that about the atmosphere, from what I've been able to glean, reading stuff from this side of the Atlantic. But what I would say is that I put on the group the bit about Ronald Dworkin, is democracy possible here? That that politics is not conducted as rational arguments so much as emotional feel and tribal loyalty. And this bit about being 2 tribes, Republicans and Democrats, has increased and continues to increase. So I don't think that whatever Biden has done, I don't think he's going to get a fair hearing. And you see, if you look at the vaccine take-up, it's not as good as it should have been because it became a tribal issue to not get vaccinated if you're a Republican. And his stimulus will be blamed for inflation, even though supply chain issues after COVID were probably, a very big contributing factor, but he will get blamed. And I think the leaving Afghanistan, the fact that Trump had already signed a defeat, a sort of left Biden with nowhere to go. So I think that on all these bases, Biden is going to be judged badly, even if it were rational, and his image is terrible. That's really what I wanted to say. But I'm sorry, terribly sorry, I've got to go.
Right. No, Martin, thank you. Appreciate it. Right. Okay, Edward, questions?
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see everybody and many familiar faces. Thank you for that fascinating and succinct summary of the situation in America right now. I am an American. I just got back. I'm living in Japan right now. I just got back though from a month in the United States, and I certainly agree with everything that I've heard so far about the different problems. I have 3 very simple questions. Actually, they're simple questions. They may have very complex answers, but if you could address each of them briefly and tell me as succinctly as you can. The first question, which has already been raised, is the question of Biden's age and his cognitive ability. Do you think that one of Biden's major problems is simply that he's too old? And perhaps in a larger context, if we look back at the last 50 or 60 years, if you look at the effectiveness of US presidents or their ranking by historians and their age, there seems to be a pattern that older presidents are ranked lower than presidents who are relatively younger. The second question is, one way to evaluate a president is you look at how they utilize their vice presidents, how they choose their vice presidents, how they use them. And Kamala Harris, of course, is the first female vice president America has ever had. She's the first person of color to be a president. She set many firsts, but has Biden done a good job as a professional politician with his entire lifetime in public service? Do you think that he has done the best that he could, or do you think he has squandered this amazing historical opportunity? And the third question is, there was just an article a couple of days ago on a website called Real Clear Politics these two scholars are from opposing ideological camps. One works for the Wilson Center, which is rather left wing, and the other is with the AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, which is considerably right wing. But they jointly wrote a very interesting article suggesting that the situation in America is almost paralyzed right now by concentration of power in the executive that is simply being blocked.
Edward, unfortunately, the sound was broken. Okay, but
the judiciary and yes.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, I will stop there and ask if you've heard my first two questions.
You heard the first two, yeah.
Being censored, Edward.
Yeah, I think first two. That's not. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Edward. Thank you very much. Right.
Tony, can I respond to a few of the points before we go on?
Yeah, let me turn off my video. That might help.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good idea, by the way. Yes, Alan. So you want to hear the third question, or you're ready?
No, I just wanted to respond to a couple of the points, if that's okay, before we go on.
Okay,
I mean, firstly, sorry, I put Liz Cheney in Wisconsin when of course she's in Wyoming. Sorry about that, Liz. Secondly, I think Jean mentioned, and it's something I entirely missed out, is monetary policy, and I think Mark might want to talk about Jerome Powell and the Fed at some point. Thirdly, when I said I'm a fan of Biden, that was really bad. I kind of misspoke Biden-esque there. What I meant was I desperately wanted Trump defeated, of course. I think a lot of what has been said goes back to one central point, which takes us all the way back to the election victory. Biden isn't Roosevelt, right? This is not FDR. And so that kind of grandiose, ludicrous talk that, you were going to get massive, federal government change on economic policy, social policy, let alone structural change on, allowing Puerto Rico or DC to become a state or, was ludicrous. I mean, if instead, maybe a year ago, it would have been, look, we need some respite from Trump. Let's have a caretaker president who's going to try and govern in the national interest. And I think a lot of the problems would have been avoided. So yeah, I put it really badly. I'm not a big, I don't like Biden, but Biden entered the Senate half a century ago. And it's just remarkable. So the age issue, yeah, of course, absolutely right. And I'm completely puzzled by Kamala Harris. I just don't get it, right? Because the tendency in recent administrations, forget Trump, was to make more and more use of your vice president, right? I mean, look at Cheney, look at Biden himself, Gore, and so on. Biden doesn't seem to have used Kamala Harris. Now, is that because Harris wants to go AWOL to not associate herself with a, failing product? Or is it Biden hasn't forgiven her for the rancor in the debates? Or, he doesn't like her, which is why he gives her immigration, which is like, a hospital pass, right? I don't know. I'm genuinely puzzled by that. So yeah. Okay, Tony, back to you.
Right. Okay, Alan, thank you very much. If you don't mind, before the questions, Hussein put a very interesting paragraph in the chat. Hussein, like from the side of Saudi Arabia, what can you say?
You want me to say the?
Yeah.
To say the question again, you already read it.
Oh, go ahead. If you say what you have written there, that would be. I think that's nice to hear. I mean, something from outside the United States of America,
Yeah. He mentioned the tone and the language change of the United States speech once Biden getting the presidency. And for Saudi, at the beginning, it was very, very tough one. And with the third month, it's began to be lower, and all relation back is still there, except that the relation on the president level, like the king and President Biden. So this one is still, still hold. Other things like military, like business, everything is okay. Nothing stops. Everything is fine, except, this kind of relation, the top relation. If this relation back again will be a positive effect on USA economy, and if there is, if not, is it going to? Is he has another vision for the future about this?
Okay, these are the questions, right? Can anybody take that? So what do you think, like the relationship of the United States of America and Saudi Arabia? Well, and I think we can slowly move to the Middle East. Anybody to take this one?
I think American
yeah.
I think American policy towards the Middle East is pretty consistent, with occasional diversions like Trump agreeing about the Israeli embassy move. I assume that if relations with Iran get worse or continue to get worse, then relations with Saudi improve. I assume that Biden's policy is just a more polite version of Trump's. Presumably supports Abraham Accords, etc., etc., etc. But I don't know. I mean, if there's anyone else who knows this stuff better than I, please say.
Yeah, no.
Alan, I'll just chime in very quickly. I agreed with your earlier comments. I don't know that Biden has a cohesive foreign policy at all. And I think he's so consumed with his own internal wars and all the issues domestically. And he understands to get elected and to get through the midterm elections, with the exception of some major conflict, he's got to focus domestically. So I would agree with your earlier statement. I'm not quite sure he has.
No, and I think you're right, especially in relation to China. He's just a more polite Trump on China. But I think anyone in the White House is going to be now. I think that's a tilt that is not going to be reversed quickly.
Can I interject real quickly? I know that Caesar might have some Middle East insights, and I know that Rich had his hand up for quite some time. So Caesar, Middle East.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sean. Actually, I just want to say, from a Middle East point of view, that we've never felt such a vacuuming in the leadership of United States in our area. We really miss the days where George Bush, the father, and Ronald Reagan says, watch and learn how we're gonna act. And everybody steps in their toes to see how the actions were to go. Unfortunately, this is the major responsibility of, well, fortunately or unfortunately, this is the major responsibilities of being a leader of the world as the United States. Countries like ours in the Middle East, small countries, are looking forward for the leadership of the United States, being the one who moderating the actions between the globe. And so we really feel a major vacuuming of the leadership of the United States in our region. Hopefully we can see that again.
Right. Cesar, thank you very much. Right, so let me ask Rich, New York. He's been having his hand up for a while. Rich, your question?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Jasso, and thanks everybody for Tony as well for having this session. I am an American. I do love my country. Edward and I have at times, I guess, fought for our country. And I have to say, I mean, at a certain point, there is a level of in the past, when I was a military member, I never spoke against the leadership. I just followed and I obeyed. And that's what I did with Barack Obama, is I followed and I obeyed. And I never questioned it. I just said, okay, this is, but when I left, that's when I started this retrospect and saying, wait a minute. Was there an issue with his policies? Was he a divisive president? And could he have united this country better? And I think there's a real missed opportunity there. And we're seeing that continue with this administration. I have to say that a two-party system is necessary to keep checks and balances. On the local level, in politics, in New York, there is a one-party monopoly system. It is in shambles. They are allowing non-citizens to vote, which I think is, honestly, it's unconstitutional. There is a Harris failure at the border, and it seems like there's some warmongers on both sides that want to sort of push this Russia, Russia, Russia policy. And here, the United States is now uniting two geopolitical powers with China and Russia together and creating a new war-torn area to use this sort of military-industrial complex. Now, it's always fascinating to see, I guess, foreigners weigh in on American policy, because I guess our news coverage really doesn't factor in, I guess, other areas. You know, we're such a big country, and being a big country, it's difficult. But when I did live in foreign countries, their news centered around the U.S. So I always found that a little bit. But I guess my question with this is Biden's son, the living one, Hunter Biden, is he a liability? And is his prior involvement in Ukraine as a drug addict and then serving on the board of Burisma legitimate? Because if these were Trump's kids that had drug issues and were getting payouts from a Ukrainian company, he would be impeached for that. But instead, somehow, with this guy was elected as president. So I'm just curious to know what your take on that is.
Right. Okay, Rich, thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Before we take this question and speak about Biden's son and his involvement in Ukraine, Mark, your question. Let's take several questions in a row.
So my question was really about the the Democratic Party. Obviously everything that everybody said, completely valid. Biden, got the not Trump vote, and may he get that vote forever. So he got the not Trump vote, but as you've also pointed out, he's been in politics for 50 years. He has a pretty good sense, I suspect, where the land lies, and so he got the biggest vote, as you already pointed out. He got the biggest vote anybody's ever had. I wonder, in terms of the Democratic Party, though, there's a bunch of people who presumably joined then, who voted for the first time, who had never voted Democrat before. And I think if a lot of those people were young, I suspect they're going to be saying, I voted for you. And have I got anything out of this? I mean, you promised me the forgiveness of student loan debt. I haven't seen any of that. You didn't say, obviously, we would get it, but we'd be talking about Medicare for all. Haven't really got any of that. And I'm sure Biden is saying, I'm the not Trump vote. I've got to try and keep the whole party together. And I wonder if he can keep the party together, I suppose, is my first question. Because the people on the left, you could say, well, he hasn't actually done a lot for them except not being Trump. And he's not really a desperately left-wing guy, I think, by sympathy either. But if things start to go wrong in the midterm, is that going to cause, which Alan says, and I'm sure you've all said, is very likely to happen, is that going to cause some major ruction in the Democratic Party, such that Alan's other points about, well, these things happen at the midterm, it doesn't mean you can't bounce back. Does that mean he can't bounce back? So that's probably my my first question. And the only thing I wanted to say about the economy was really, the economy's doing pretty well. But it's got a couple of things. It's got a couple of these sort of, you know, volcano type issues which are underground, and may they forever stay underground. But they're there. Number one is this massive asset inflation due to incredibly low, not to say real negative interest rates. Let's hope that never comes flying apart. And then together with that, you know, the idea that we've got inflation on the horizon, of course, that's going to be expected to be dealt with on a monetary basis. So if we then start to get higher interest rates, maybe my first problem now does come out in the open, because some of the asset bubbles will burst. And so that would be another thing that I would worry about based on the scenarios you've all painted so far, those two major issues, I think.
Right. Okay, Mark, thank you very much. In fact, yes, voting rights in the US is a big issue and concern that Biden hasn't solved yet. So that's the thing. So how would we address these questions? Any comments? I mean, we do not have experts, guys. That's the platform for discussion. So everybody's welcome, you know, to kind of contribute with his or her ideas to that. So whether Biden can be judged by the deeds of his son, and whether that's the right thing to do, actually, maybe that's the topic for, you know, one of the following discussions, since we are going to meet quite regularly in this format. So anybody reach his question, anything to say? Oh yes, Steve, please, you have to say something.
Yeah, I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm a big fan of the United States. I lived there for a number of years, and I'm also a big fan of Uncle Joe, as I like to call him. You know, for me,
Steve, maybe you mentioned that you're joining from Cambridge, UK.
But I'm joining from Cambridge, UK, yeah. So I think for me, Joe Biden really had three jobs of what is, you know, clearly almost certainly going to be a one-term presidency. The first job was to end Donald Trump, end Donald Trump's presidency, job done. Join the Paris Accords and take climate seriously, job done. Control the pandemic, jury's out, I guess. Now, I think the big elephant in the room here is that we only really have in the United States one functional political party. The GOP is no longer, to my mind, a functioning political party. It does not collectively accept basic facts. They don't accept that they lost the election. They did. They don't accept that the January 6th insurrection happened. It did. And they don't accept that Donald Trump and his family is basically a criminal enterprise. It is. So without coming together to accept those basic facts, it's difficult to see how the country can tackle those key issues of voting rights, climate change, employment, inflation, all of that. And with only one political party really functioning on any level, it's difficult to see how any of that can happen. In terms of just one last point on global leadership, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing that one country is no longer there to take control of global leadership. I think what should probably happen is that we should see international institutions such as the United Nations, such as NATO, play a greater role. And we don't all look to America or to Russia or to China for global leadership. We should never look towards one country. But in terms of, you know, Biden, I'm not aware of any constitutional mechanism for a president to be impeached because of the behavior of their children. If that had happened, indeed, Donald Trump would be impeached because, you know, his family is, again, to my mind, a criminal enterprise.
If I could comment on that one, may I? Briefly?
Yes.
Just briefly. It's quite an interesting comment. I'll just comment on the Republican Party. They seem pretty competitive to me, and having a wedge into, they're doing their function of being competitive. Calling it a criminal gang, I think, is pretty high rhetoric. I'll just end it at that. But that's what this stuff is for. Tony, back to you.
Tony, I'd like to say something.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
I think that I agree with sort of both points of view. that I can appreciate that a lot of people believe that the Trump enterprise is criminal. But equally, again, trying to present America today, I'm not trying to represent Kathy. I think that there are many people in America that feel you could prove that the Clinton dynasty was also a criminal enterprise. And whether you believe one and not the other, or whether you believe both, I think the issue at a populist level in the US is that, you know, politics have become a for-profit enterprise. If you look at the amount of money Pelosi had going into her terms, and you look at the amount of money, her net worth now, and you can say, oh, well, her husband did well. Well, if you peel back the onion on how her husband did well, there is certainly breadcrumbs of advanced knowledge on the way the political winds were blowing. So I think the average citizen in America doesn't refute, Steve, that that someone in power may be conducting it or may be behaving in an illegal fashion. I think that the problem or the issue in America right now is that we don't trust anybody. We don't trust the right or the left to take care of us as citizens. And that's why you're seeing all of this groundswell. I loved when the gentleman said politics is emotional. It's totally emotional. It's totally emotional because it's about the hearts and minds and the lifestyle of a person. And so I think that you were obviously very passionate about your points, and I respect that. But I think there's equal passion when I hear people talk about the fact that the Clinton Foundation, the day after she left office, completely disappeared. You know, and why? Because she was selling favors. So that's the rhetoric you hear on the other side.
Catherine, thank you so much. Actually, you know, politics as for-profit enterprise, Kathy, I think that's a wonderful topic for one of our next discussions. Guys, if you feel like that you can prepare an introductory talk on this, please let me know, send me an email, but I think it's a wonderful title. Right, okay, thank you. Since we've got like 18 even minutes left, I suggest that we talk more about the global perspective, right? How actually he performed in international foreign politics. And I have a very interesting note from my colleague, Dr. Matt Tran, in the chat box. Matt, would you say about, you know, actions of Biden and Biden's administration and moving, you know, Eastern states towards China rather? Matt?
Yes,
so Matt is
I'm here.
joining us. Yes, Matt is joining us from Vietnam. Matt, sorry, I haven't seen you right from the beginning, but please go ahead. Could you elaborate a bit more on your point? I find it very valuable.
Oh yes, so there are arguments from the news in Asia, from Vietnam specifically, and you know Vietnam is well a lot. You know, the Vietnamese people are a lot anti-China in most ways. Well, we're not sure about the government, and I don't want to go deep into conspiracy theories here, but the Vietnamese government, for a lot of scholars, they're really against China because of their aggressive behavior. Now, well, but that could be one of the reasons why a lot of what we observe here in Vietnam and the Philippines also, that's, you know, what the US has been sorry about this, but behaving for the past few years has been pushing countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar towards China, and that had a lot of I would say instability, you know, that has been created in those countries that are related to what China has been doing. So I just wanted to know, you know, what's the you know current views of the Western world about this issues.
Right. Okay, Matt. Thank you very much. Actually, since I think Cesar, would you also ask about the state of relationships and, you know, activities of the United States?
Well, yeah,
the
actually, I'm
international
gonna keep
arena. Yeah.
I'm gonna keep my video off so to enhance the better quality of voice. You know,
That's absolutely fine.
yeah, Steve mentioned something about it's okay that the US is not taking a leadership role in the globe. This is really panicking, because in the end, I think United Nations is going to take the approach of the consensus of leading the globe approach. And that's why we feel, as small countries in the Middle East and maybe in the globe, the lack of leadership is a very dangerous status where we don't have any clear future path and no directions and a vacuuming of leadership. And, you know, the US has left the globe with unclear path, I mean, mid to short term. And this is very dangerous. And we are all, concerned about the situation.
Okay, thank you very much. So this notion of mono power that stayed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? And just being the leading one, and you say that actually leadership is lacking, or at least the feeling of leadership coming from the United States, something that is scarce. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know, how would we react to this, questions? Well, since there wasn't a question, that was rather a statement, but Matt's question. So do we have anything to add, Ellen? What do you think? Maybe
I think
US and China basically over this 1 year, right? Because
we need to be a bit clearer about this. I mean, it is a unipolar world militarily. Actually, it's a myth to say that China is a military competitor with the United States. It isn't. If you go by aircraft carriers, the United States has got 11. I think China's got 1. Undoubtedly, in 50 years, it will be. But at the moment, the United States is in a league of its own militarily. That's not the issue. The issue is not the power. The issue is the use of power and whether the United States is willing to use that power. That's the notion of, the US is a reluctant empire. And obviously, we've got to go back to Afghanistan and what happened in Afghanistan in the summer. And that's either, a sensible withdrawal from a never-ending war that was badly handled, or it's a statement of, intent in the United States is to some extent, not as willing as it once was to exercise power. And I don't think you can look at what Biden is or isn't doing with Ukraine without reference back to what happened in Afghanistan. I broke the habit of a lifetime and watched Fox News yesterday. Absolutely remarkable. I mean, just extraordinary. The bile, the vituperative comments directed towards the Biden administration, it just staggered me, actually. And among the comments was, and it kind of ties back to something someone said earlier, the Democrats impeached Trump for a phone call about the Ukraine. If the Biden administration's, if the gaffe the other day results in, a failure, however you define and measure that, of the Ukraine in the days and weeks ahead, then that's going to put a phone call to Zelensky in some pretty sharp perspective, right? The global situation is fascinating. None of this started with Biden, right? Obama talks about a pivot to Asia. Trump talked about, we're not going to fight wars that are not in our strategic interest. I mean, would it matter who was in the White House? Isn't the United States to some extent going to withdraw anyway? Not because it doesn't have the power, but because it doesn't have the inclination. Isn't that, aren't we overrating the importance of Biden here? This is the Pentagon, this is the defense, this is the State Department, right? I mean, this is not one frail old guy in the White House deciding this. Isn't that right?
That's a big question, but actually, I find it interesting that the global situation you characterize as fascinating rather than quite worrying. Alan, with all this recent development.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Exactly, it's rather terrifying.
And forget Taiwan if you can, forget Iran if you can, just look at the Ukraine for God's sake.
Yes.
Russia has amassed more troops on the border of Ukraine than the United States fought in Iraq. This is not a power play by Putin. This is serious. This is real. I can't believe how stock market. Well, I was going to say I can't believe how stock markets are reacting. But if you look back to August 1914, stock markets didn't react then either. Stock markets take a while. If Ukraine goes as badly over the next couple of weeks as I think it's about to do, then we need to discuss it pronto.
Does Europe or even the UK, for example, they're much closer to Russia in proximity than the United States. What is their role in the defense of Ukraine? Like, why does this always fall on the US to sort of do this? I mean, the Europeans have armament. They've been provided more money, I guess, under the Trump administration to ramp up their military structure. Why is it that we're seeing sort of a leadership vacuum in Europe?
Because the
Thank
EU.
you, Rich. That's a good point, Alan. Yes, go ahead.
Well, Rich, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Because the EU has no coherent foreign and defence policy and never has had. And the Germans are acting out of self-interest, and to a certain extent, so the French. The Brits, actually, for once, I have no sympathy whatsoever with the Johnson government, but I agree with them spot on this, are saying, this is a threat to Europe. So, yeah, I don't disagree with you, Rich. We need to step up.
To step up, and would it depend on the decision coming finally from Biden? Is he the one to judge and to decide, or rather it should be UN, and kind of more representative?
It can't be the UN. It can't be the UN. Russia and China would veto it. It has to be Europe.
Okay, right, thank you. Any other ideas? Yes, Milan, you said that you prefer another name, but I don't know your first name.
That's okay. That's okay. Milan's my son's name, and I just have to little change the setting on this thing.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing is, can we step back a little bit and explain the build up to the Ukraine issue? Because my just casual understanding is that the Russians sought to get security guarantees, sort of like a buffer area around them, given the Cold War history. And Europe and the Americans seems to have overplayed their hand when they thought Russia was weak. Would America like to have Russia hanging out in Mexico, and sort of just kind of making itself comfortable there? Why isn't there some kind of accommodation for Russia's security interests to avert the Ukraine crisis? Am I reading this wrong?
Thank you, Milan. Or like Alan mentioned in the beginning, Putin heading around in Cuba. So Alan, go ahead.
To me, it's a simple issue of sovereign states. If sovereign states want to join NATO, if Georgia and Ukraine back in 2008 want to join NATO, if Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, I don't believe Moscow should have a veto on who joins NATO. I think the cause of the problem is Russia, and has been for an awful long time. If the Mexican government wanted to join an alliance that was anti-United States, as a sovereign state, Mexico must be allowed to do that.
So is there any official document in place that might be used by Russia as kind of a restrictive factor for NATO to go further to the border of the Russian Federation? Is there?
No, there's a complete myth that that NATO said they wouldn't expand east. That's just not true. NATO can't say what it's going to do in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. Putin's used that endlessly, but no.
Okay, Ellen.
If you want agreements, if you want black and white, look at
exactly. There was an agreement, right?
Yeah, from 1994 that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for the inviolability of its frontiers. Well, that went out the window in 2014 when Russia grabbed Crimea. So it's a failure to stand up in 2014 that's caused the current problem.
I don't believe the chairman of the board is on this call, but she is Ukrainian by birth. She won the math competition for all of the Soviet Union and therefore got a free scholarship to the Moscow Institute of Technology. She's arguably smarter than a whole bunch of us combined on this call. And what she would tell you is exactly what Alan is sort of talking about, which is the fatal mistake was giving up a lot of their weapons. This is not my area of expertise, but I do know that Putin, just last year, I believe, either wrote a piece on the disintegration of what he called historical Russia. And he literally referred to this issue as the Russians and Ukrainians are one nation. And so that whole concept of him putting forth that this is one nation, it's not two. There is, he's implying by his language that that there is not sovereignty, and that he has been very vocal and very critical of what he has said is the current leadership in the Ukraine, because they are running what he has called an anti-Russian project, which goes against this historical integration. If you want to have a discussion on it in the future, Tony, I'm sure Dr. Malasheva would join and actually be a guest speaker because she's lived it both in the country and from afar now.
Yes, no, absolutely, Kathy. Actually, I'm, taking the notes. I'm making a list of topics for our further future discussions. But yes, Milan, thank you very much. I'm sure that would be the topic of a special session on that, and on the particularly since the events are developing in the present, tense currently. So yeah, we shall. Mark, you have your hand up, and we are about to finish. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to introduce a sort of a more commercial vector to those geopolitical discussions. That was all. I don't have anything to say about what all you learned people have said so far. I mean, we want cheap goods. We want cheap goods. We don't want to make them. We want to move up the value chain towards service industries and intellectual property. We don't want to make cheap goods. China doesn't want to make cheap goods either. That's where they had to start, but they want to move up the value chain as well. And so in order to get the cheap goods that we need, they're going to have to offshore the manufacturing to places like Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And that's going to be expensive. There's going to be a lot of foreign direct investment. And that's true. They're going to need the raw materials as well from places in Africa, Mali and Niger and everywhere else. So are they not allowed any political outreach and influence? They've got to put all the money in, but you're not going to allow them to have influence on those countries. That was the vector I wanted to introduce to that. That was all.
Okay, that's a good vector. So we've got like 1 minute. Anybody to reply on that?
I think the vector of the Belt and Road Initiative is quite interesting. That could be a topic for next time.
Yeah,
They've tried that, and it's had some hiccups. I'll use that word mildly.
Yeah.
So economic hegemony and political hegemony might be a bit different, especially from China.
Right.
China is the largest. Yeah, China is the largest investor in Africa. I think that's been reported in multiple places. I think they've invested in over 70 billion. And I couldn't agree more with what Mark said. They want to become a superpower and move up the industrial food chain. And therefore they need to outsource just like we did and Western Europe did in years past. So that is in fact the motivation. And I think you're right, Mark. If I invest 70 billion in something, I get a say in it. That's just plain old economics.
Right. But that's the topic I have recorded. We're going definitely to have, China's modern investments in the African states, including, other initiatives. But since we've got like literally 5 minutes left, I would like to take Alemo's point in our chat box about the Biden's foreign affairs policies towards Africa, because we've got people, from the African continent, so that would be a shame not to use their expertise. So guys, what about your feelings, like any ideas, what's going on in your part of the world? Mulungu, I have seen you. Would you tell us about your country? Mulungu, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you very much. We are kind of dissatisfied most of the time because
Oh, sorry, name your country that you.
Oh, my country is Zambia and Central Africa. You can get me?
Yes, we'll continue, please.
Yes, I think that in terms of geopolitics, we don't seem to have much say in this part of the world. We just bulldozed most of the time in terms of the things that we do. You know, when there are elections in America, like we would think that when Democrats come in, maybe we'll be better off in terms of looking at the things that really trouble us. But when they win, it's the same thing. When the Republicans come in, it's the same thing. Britain has been was our colonial master. We thought we would get some support, but we never do. We are really on the periphery when it comes to geopolitics in this part of the world. That's what I would say. For now, it has become very clear whether the Republicans have won, the Democrats, whether it's Biden or it's Trump, doesn't make much change to us.
Okay, Mulungu.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very important contribution. Right. Okay. So I'm just trying to, in parallel, to look at the chat box as well, and there are very many interesting comments and posts. So guys, please do have a look as well, because yeah, that's kind of overwhelming for me, you know, to manage both. So we have literally 4 minutes left. So any final comments from anybody on the topic discussed, or maybe ideas? I mean, okay, not discuss. Let's not discuss future topics for future meetings, just on the points mentioned and discussed at our session. Anybody, some final conclusive remarks?
There's this chant going on about Joe Biden, and I just wanted to know if anybody had the lecturer
Rich, could you repeat it? I didn't get the beginning of your question.
Yeah, like there's this chant going on, and I've never really seen this before, but this seems to be sort of spreading across, and I think it's "Let's Go Brandon."
Right.
You want to end on "Let's Go Brandon"?
I do. I do.
For all of you who don't know what that means, look it up. It's kind of funny, but not really, but it's funny. When you learn what it is, it's just funny, but it has become a soft way of saying something else on the presidency.
Yeah, it's a code for insulting him. You know, and again, I think it's a shame, but we, you know, our society has descended into insults but it started out as someone misheard a crowd chanting, and they thought they were chanting "Let's go Brandon," and they were actually chanting the F word, Joe Biden. And so now it is viewed as the equivalent of, if you say "Let's go Brandon," you are insulting the president. And it's just, you know, again, our society's become petty and irresponsible. And I think that that's what it's about.
One thing that was mentioned in the very, very beginning, which in my view is essential, is that high politics is about good debate. And I watch Prime Minister's Questions every week. I'm a little UK junkie. But I would encourage all of us, first of all, thank you to Dr. Santalova for organizing this terrific job, first class. Thank you to all of you who came on board. This is a lot of fun. And Tony will put together, we'll do this every other day, I think, right? Every other day. But good politics is about good ideas, good debate, and being able to hold an argument. And I think across the world, many politicians are lacking in good argument, holding facts to fiction. Maybe that's a neat takeaway for me as I hear everyone, I think, do good debate and argument in this session today.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. We have Cesar. He has his hand up.
Yes, actually, I would like to see a point of discussions in the future around the major disturbance of the global supply chain, and the major increase of cost in supply chain. I mean, and the impact of China on that, and which really impact the consumer buying power in the poor countries in the globe. So, what would be the U.S. point of view toward that area? I mean, this is impacting the daily life of the basic human being. And you cannot imagine that the cost now is 300% increase on the supply chain. So this is a major point that would like to see some further discussions in the future.
Caesar, I think that because there are many DBAs on this call right now, what we could do in the future is you and others can bring forth some research and deliver it as well. We can help you.
Okay, Sean, do not read my lines. Definitely. I was going to say thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful session, for your participation. We are going to meet regularly, by the way, so do save times on Sundays from 4 till 5:30 p.m. for diaries. And please, we're not going to insult anybody. Rich, I'm going to disappoint you here, but we are definitely going to discuss and exchange ideas and exchange our, our private life, business life experiences. So that's what we are doing here. And please do join us again. And thank you very much. And take the best care of yourselves and your loved ones. And I see you next Monday. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.
And special thanks to you, Alan. Thank you for your starting talk. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.